So Keith and I met up a couple of weeks ago. We did a social distancing. I dropped some stuff off. He left me a number of beers out of his cellar. And it left it up to me to select what we were going to do tonight with drink. So I have chosen Cameron's Where the Buffalo Rome. And I've had it sitting out of the fridge now for about an hour to warm it up just a little bit.
Kind of a change watching you drink, Bill.
Oh, that's good active.
Isn't it, though?
Show them.
Thank Lawrence Folland for handing me this backdrop.
Show them that.
Cheers. King.
Cheers, Keith. Hey, Heather.
Hey, Bill. I shouldn't need to yell.
Love the bows there, Keith.
Hi, Kim.
Look at them all laying there all
This
sexy.
I'm my Heather, Cat Jackie's here beside me, making sure she saves me.
I like it.
This is not Cam.
Yeah, Keith, this is really good.
How did it age? Not that you had the original, but how's it taste?
Tastes good. Tastes good.
Right on.
There's a lot of back end bitter, which is of course what I always enjoy doing.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to get you up. Keith and I are enjoying something out of his cellar where the buffalo roams. So, anyways, thank you all for coming. I'm really excited. I roared out to the car and I got my bottle opener, the one that I have worn completely out after 20 years at kickoff.
Nice.
Thumbs up here.
So, anyways, Keith and I decided tonight, well, first of all, some ground rules. If you haven't, probably appreciate you muting your mic while Keith and I talk. We're going to talk about cellaring beers for about 10 minutes. I know I could have muted all of you as you joined me. And I also like to let you know, my wife's pointing to it, I am recording this because we are going to be putting it up on the Kickoff Annex website. We're gonna archive all this stuff so people can go back to them. David Hussey's been helping me put together the Kickoff Annex website, and then we're going to be building everything off of that. And but I'm excited, Keith. We're excited to talk about cellaring beer, and I'm just going to hand it right over to you. And then I'll just ask a bunch of questions. Why would you cellar beer, Keith?
All right. Well, why would I cellar beer?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes when you have a beer, you get a beer, something like what I would call some beers can be green. So, the recipe, it tastes nice when you first have it, but sometimes you need to let something age and get some subtleties out of it, some nuances. The closest thing I can compare it to is kind of like, and I don't know this, but people do it with cheese, right? Like you want some cheeses to age for like 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And the complexities come out of what they've created. So I feel that beer, well, obviously not just me, but other people, beer is the same way. You can brew a beer and it tastes nice the way it is, but sometimes you need to let it age a little bit and let certain things mellow out and certain other flavors come in stronger. You want to, see what can happen after a year or more of sitting on something. And with the Camerons that you're trying with the Buffalo, like that's one that's been aging since I guess that's 2.5 years now. So you tell me, like you said, you tried it. What do you think?
So first of all, I never tried it when it first came out, so I don't have a comparative to it. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with that beer. There's no front end floral or sweetness to it. I don't know if there was to begin with. Should read the label, eh? So they had Cascade hops in it, and they used Munich and two-row malts. So there wouldn't have been very much sweetness to begin with at the front end of it. But the back end bitters developed and mellowed out really well.
And that's exactly the point, right? Like you kind of want to, you try it at first and you go, that's a nice beer, but why don't I sit on some of this and see what develops? I guess wine would probably be the same way, but I'm not much of a wine drinker. Like, I don't know, you'd have to tell me. I know I don't look the part, but you know, you kind of have to let things mature, I guess. And that's the beauty of cellaring certain kinds of beer. I mean, there are definitely like, you know, certain things, I don't want to call them rules because they're not necessarily rules around cellaring beer, but there are certain kind of guidelines that you want to follow when you are cellaring things. You know, you kind of don't want to go with anything. Could age for about a year. You could sit on anything for a year and you'll probably notice some differences. But when you're talking about like really hoppy beers, or you're talking about pilsners or anything like that, you probably don't want to age them. We're talking more about like sour beers, you know, things that are already complex. Those are the kind of things you want to age to see what you'll yield out of it. And odds are you're probably going to end up with something that's even more enjoyable than the first time. So normally what I try to do is if I find a beer I really like, well, I'm going to get 2 bottles or 2 cans of that. I'm going to have one now and I'm going to have one later. I'm going to sit on one for a year or 2 and I'm going to see what it tastes like then, bring it out on a special occasion with some people who appreciate beer, open it up and let's taste it together. You know what I mean?
Same kind of thing that you would do with a wine. You know,
Right on. So I'm not that far away.
Oh. I got my coach over here going, I need to ask you, where do you cellar your beer?
Ah, yes. Okay. Hold on one second. I need to cleanse my palate with a shot. There we go.
Okay.
So it depends on how serious you want to be about cellaring your beers, right? The main idea is that you kind of want to maintain like temperature, light, and humidity. So where can you manage those 3 aspects for cellaring your beer? Now, we do have the luxury of having like a cellar space where we live that we can keep our beer somewhere where it's cool and it's dark and the humidity is kind of like between 50 and 70%. So, you know, it works perfectly for us. Other people, like maybe you live in an apartment, you know, like a 3rd floor apartment, you can't necessarily do that. You can cellar your beer in a fridge as long as it's not somewhere that you're opening and closing all the time. You kind of want to keep it, you know, a consistent temperature. You want to keep it out of the light as much as possible if it's something that's in a bottle so that it doesn't get light struck, and something that you can maintain humidity. Now, like fridges aren't good for that because fridges are built to kind of take humidity out of the air. But for the most part, you know, we're not scrutinizing the beer that heavily, so you can store it in your fridge and still enjoy it. Does that make sense?
Of course, that makes sense. It's very similar. When you have a discussion about cellaring wines, it's the same kind of thing. You can spend $50,000 and have somebody build you a cellar for your wines.
Yeah.
Or you can turn around and spend time understanding that what you don't want is quick changes in temperature, whereas changes in temperature aren't the factor that you're doing. You just want it to be cool and dark. I'm even getting the signal. I'm at 10 minutes now.
We're at 10 minutes. I'm sorry, I babbled.
Oh, that's perfectly okay. But you and I were discussing this the other day, and the one difference between cellaring, so let me first, gradual change in temperature does not affect the quality of what you're going to get. What will affect it is going from sitting in 4 degrees Celsius to sitting in 30 degrees Celsius, and that happens in a matter of minutes. So like 30 minutes, 2 hours, that kind of thing. But a gradual increase in temperature isn't going to affect it. So you can have it. What you need is a dark space to put it in and a space where it's not going to be disturbed.
Exactly.
You know, And then once you've done that, if you can keep it at a cooler temperature, that's great, but it doesn't matter if there's a fluctuation in temperature.
So treat your beer like you want to be treated.
They
Let me
do
sit
have
there where it's
personality.
quiet, where I don't get bothered, and we're happy.
Yeah, I won't agree with that out loud. Jackie's sitting beside me. Treat it like your best friend.
The
Your
less
wife.
you talk to me, the better. The less you're in my face, the better.
The
And I'll be
one
sweet as pie the
difference,
next time
though,
you see me.
between what you do with wine and what you do with beer is wine, you always want to store it on a slight angle downward so you keep the cork moist. With beer, you were saying you need to have it upright standing in the fridge. Why is that?
Yeah, totally. Like you do have corked beers, right? Like there are uncorked beer, whatever you call it. I don't know that fancy word, but there are beers with corks in them. So you kind of have the same situation where you do want to keep it so that the cork doesn't dry out. But the point with beer is that a lot of people, when they think of cellaring beers, they have limited space. So what they want to do is they kind of want to lay them down, and like what they see in like the movies with people in their wine cellars and these racks of beers. You don't want to do that, because the more surface space you have for your beer, the more oxidation can occur. So when you lay your beer down, like that little bubble in the top spreads out over the course of the whole beer, and you've got more oxygen that's bleeding into the beer, and that's going to spoil the flavor. So you want to keep it standing up, so you've got a minimal surface space that's just the size of the neck to preserve the flavor of the beer.
Okay, that makes perfect sense because you got less surface area exposed to oxygen to create off flavors.
Exactly. Yeah.
We also
And again,
sorry.
sorry. No, you go ahead.
I'm going to say we also talked about the fact that the criteria for selecting what beers you would put into a cellar. You mentioned normally it would be higher octane, beers, 10%, 13% beers, but and the difference between doing a bottle and a can is not actually something to discuss about. Cans you actually could store sideways because there's no air.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like they're sealed tight. They're not going to get light struck, right? Because what's happening when you have what am I trying to say here? With light struck beer, I'm sure you all know it, but the light is hitting the bottle, and that's affecting the alpha. What's the word I'm looking for?
I don't remember the word you're looking for. Sorry.
God, what's the word I'm looking for? It'll come to me way after we're done.
If Remy unmutes himself, he could probably tell us immediately.
Acids, the alpha acids. So yeah, sorry, that was not that anybody cares. I just had to say it for myself. When light hits the bottle, it affects the alpha acids in the hops. So what's happening then is you end up getting that skunky flavor. So to get nerdy about it, like Heineken in North America isn't as skunky or is skunkier than it is in Europe, because when they first transferred the beer here, it oxidized and the alpha acids got screwed up. So when people here open up a bottle of Heineken, they go, "Oh, it's skunky. I'm supposed to like it." But really, you're not. And anyway, total tangent. But what was your question?
I think you covered it off.
All right, I did. Awesome. I got nerdy on top.
So guys, I'd like you all to unmute, and if there's any questions, hands up and ask Keith your questions. A couple of things ahead of that, though. With the Kickoff Annex website, David doesn't know this yet, but he's going to find out today. We're going to have a spot. I'd like the cellar challenge. I'd like you to select a 6-pack of some beer, log it onto. We're going to have a spot for you to log that onto on the Kickoff Annex website. The beer that you choose, crack one open, give us the taste profile right away, throw it in your fridge, and every 3 months, I'd like you to pull one out and see how it's changed, and keep us all apprised of that. So that's sort of and at a year and a half from now, we'll compare the notes and see what everyone thinks.
I'm game with that.
Okay. The other thing is, next week, Cam is joining us. Him and I are going to have a chat after this because we haven't actually decided what it is that him and I will be discussing with beer. But Cam Bartel from the Grat House, him and I are going to be doing one at the same time next week. I'll be putting a post out later this week once Cam and I have come to what it is that him and I will be discussing. So if you guys want to unmute and ask Keith any question, by all means, please go ahead and do that.
I promise you I won't have an answer.
You would not be the first time.
Hi, Keith. I'm David.
David?
David?
Hi, yeah. So I had a quick question. What's the farthest you've ever traveled for a beer?
The farthest I've ever traveled for a beer?
Yeah, as someone who's just in love with it. Like, what's the farthest you've ever gone for a beer?
Well,
Like, maybe it's especially beer in another country.
as luck had it, that I was traveling there for work, but it was a place I wanted to go, and it is a heavy metal sour brewery in Colorado. So it was like, oh my God, I love their beers. I love their labels. This is amazing. And then work was like, hey, do you want to go down to the craft brewers convention? And I was like, okay. But it was like, it melded my worlds of beer and metal so perfectly. I was like, I think I'm in heaven. I don't ever want to go home.
You're saying it had something to do with the hair.
What's that?
It had something to do with the hair.
I don't know about that. You mean you can cut this stuff?
It would be my pleasure to come to your place and cut that for you. You would trust me with a sharp
Different
object
show.
near your head.
Different show.
More so than others, let's put it that way.
So,
Remy, do you have a question? Oh, sorry, Ed.
well, if Remy's got the question, Remy can go ahead. If okay, so I was just wondering, I've been to some European pubs where they'll sell like their Trappist ales, like Orval and things like that. You can either buy Orval or Old Orval, and they've actually like cellared it themselves. There's a definite price difference. Are they just sticking it in the cellar and just like selling it the case a year later, or?
Well, they're kind of, what they're doing is they're actually taking some of the beers, and 'cause I know exactly what you're talking about, and they do cellar the beers there, and so it is actually worthwhile to, if you want to pay for most people aren't going to go, wait, I can get that beer for that much or that beer for that much. So if you're distinguishing between the two, then you actually are looking at the cellared beer that they've been sitting on, which is actually really cool. So I'm guessing it was around in Belgium that you were, or?
Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, that like depends
Yeah.
on the level of the bar, you know?
Yeah, they take their beers so seriously there, and they take the Trappist ales so seriously that they're not going to put something on a menu if they haven't followed through with it. Especially because they could be called out so readily.
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
yeah.
when you walk down the road and there's like an 800-year-old abbey, and they're like, "Hey, wait a second."
Yeah.
So it seems like you're kind of like consumer cautious about it, but it is actually genuine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Eric.
I just wanted to add to that. You'll notice on a lot of those beers that they have an extremely long best before date on them. So I was in Belgium last year. I got to go to Cantillon, which was amazing. And some of the bottles I brought home, like they say you can cellar them until like 2039, 2040.
And
so
what was
we
the
thought about
ABV?
opening them this year and like, well, should we yet? I don't know.
Yeah. Like, that's what the original question from Bill was before I got on my tangent, was what kind of beers you want to cellar. And a lot of them tend to be high ABV. A lot of dark beers are. So what you had was probably a higher ABV,
Yeah.
like a quad or something like that.
So they do a lot of sours, like Gueuses and Creeks and Lambics and that kind of thing.
And like sour beers, again, they're just going to get more like the
Yeah.
tartness. They're going to like get bolder or mellow out over time. They're perfect for cellaring because you can see what happens, because especially if it's like a wild fermentation yeast, right? It's perfect for that. Like, what's going to happen? So
Yeah. Bloody hard to choose when to drink it.
yeah. And what's the ABV on the beer that you were bringing home?
A lot of them are like only 7, 8. Like they're not massively high.
But that's not an only. Like 7 or 8 is perfect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's
That's like a great threshold for
the middle
celery.
ground.
The ABV is high enough, it's going to maintain, it's going to be stable through that whole process, right? That's why they put that like, hey, this will last for like 20 years.
If it's anything like wine, if they've said this length of time, that's when to do it. I mean, from my experience, because I like the petite style, and they usually start opening them up 8 years after I put them down, and realize when I've cracked the last one, which could be like 12 years later, like 12 years out, I wish I hadn't opened a single one until I got to that point. So if they're saying good till 2030, if you've got more than one, you could crack one at a certain point, but then leave the other one for as long as you can.
Totally. And that's the whole idea. Like a lot of breweries, when they put a best before date on something, or sorry, like whatever, sell by, whatever you want to call it, is like the original brew, here's what we think the flavor profile should be. And anything past that has changed beyond what we think it should be. And that's a safe zone. It's not meant to be like a, hey, this could get better. It's a safe zone to say, if you've never had our beer before and you try this beer and it tastes weird, well, we don't want to be responsible. But the idea is like, we really know you can sit on it for way longer. You know what I mean? And it covers a whole bunch of territories by having that date on it. So,
Tim, you got a question?
Yeah, Keith, what is the longest beer you've ever cellared, and what was the flavor profile of it?
Tim, it's nice to see your face after so many messages, eh?
What, you guys don't have Zoom?
How's the family?
Doing good. Yeah.
Longest I've cellared something was, oh my gosh, that's a good question. I'm trying to think, and it's got to have been, okay. Honestly, it was a Russian Imperial Stout that my friend and I homebrewed, and I left it for 8 years, and we opened it, I'm saying 2 years ago, and it tasted like crap.
You win some, you lose some, Nate, eh?
It wasn't worth the wait. Let's put it that way. Sorry to deflate that one, but
Mr. Hussey, you have a question.
Yeah, so one real quick one, which is now listening, I'm trying to store a couple beers that I got before pandemic times, and I'm trying to store them for me and a couple buddies. They're just in my fridge right now. You guys had mentioned temperature changes and that kind of stuff. I'm starting to realize I do have access to a cellar type place that I could store them. But now that they've been in the fridge for, let's call it like 3 weeks, is it better just leaving them there and I've already been opening it, or should I move them downstairs?
Is it like a major, like, do you have to wait
like a 500, like half liter bottle?
Get a stone basement?
I do.
Okay,
Oh,
move them downstairs. Keep
Okay,
them off the
sweet.
dirt floor, put them up on wood or something if they're shelving,
Yep.
okay? And
Like
that
you're
will
not
maintain,
taking like
that will
days to
maintain
move them,
your,
it's just like a span of like within a half hour you're moving it.
Like I can move them right now, yeah.
Oh, go do it. Yeah, totally. Because it'll slowly condition itself.
because, yeah, the temperature change will be slow for it, and the
Yeah.
humidity level will be constant to a reasonable amount. It'll
Sweet.
change when you kick in the furnace, say in the wintertime. But
Yeah,
basically in
that's
the
the thing is-
summertime, the humidity will stay the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. And then second one is like, I think you might have already said this, but like, what are the major tones or aspects of beer that change when cellaring?
Oh, like the major flavor profiles that change?
Yeah.
I find that a lot of the time you'll get like a lot of, sorry, unless you want to start, Bill, but you go.
Go,
Yeah.
by all means, go.
Okay. I find that a lot of some of that overt hoppiness or whatever you get from certain beers might mute itself over time. I find that you get a lot of earthiness out of beers the longer they sit. You tell me what happened with the Camerons that you just tried. What do you think of that one? Because I'm dying to hear about that.
Well, like I said, there's no front sweet tone in it at all, which you would
Yeah.
normally expect with a Cascade hop. There's none of that citrus front tone, because those are the first ones to go. The sweeter, the higher tones, they all are the ones that leave. Yeah, I'm getting notes from my coach there. Sorry, but the high tones are the ones that leave first. They're the ones you hit first. They're the ones that leave when you age something. So when you age a wine, just like with a beer, when you age a wine, all of the sweetness dissipates. And what you're starting to get is all that back end lingering flavors.
Yeah, because all the sugar gets eaten up and it's gone.
Yeah.
Like any residual yeast is going to suck up that sugar and it's out. And then you're just left with, yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah.
So I have a quick question. So some beers are conditioned in the bottle. Are there any scares that it could actually overcarbonate and explode still? Like, is there any additional carb happening during cellaring?
Sorry, I was laughing. Just one of the guys that come into the bar over-hopped something once like crazy and couldn't put it in a bottle. He had to actually keep it in a stainless steel sealed container because every bottle just popped out the cap all the time. Yeah, you're laughing, but you know exactly what was going on. Yep. The massive amounts of carbon dioxide coming off that continually.
But the question itself, it's like a genuine, like totally, yeah, I totally know what you're saying. But anybody who's probably like brewed to the point where there are bottle conditioning, it can happen in home brewing, but typically if you've invested in your like brew house and bottling line and crowning and everything, you're probably got a safe zone that you're not going to hit that point where like you've probably killed off enough of the yeast that it's not going to generate that much more CO2. But that's not to say it's not going to happen, because a lot of people don't sit on these. You're sitting on them in a cooler zone, so it's going to kind of like sedate a lot of the yeast. It's going to be slower to ferment. So you might not get that situation. Sometimes if you had a bottle that you take out that you've been cellaring, and then once it's warming up, it may end up popping because there is enough yeast that's not inert, but it's a valid question, but hopefully it doesn't happen. Let's just put it that way, given the beers that you're probably going to cellar. You know what I mean?
Okay, and my second question is more a throwaway. I'm guessing no amount of aging will make Coors Light taste good.
Well, none yet.
I'm not even touching that, Keith. It's a very valid point. No amount of aging will make Coors Light taste good.
It will revert back to water over time.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Cam.
But I hope that did answer your question, to be honest. Like, there is the risk of it, but odds are it's not going to happen. You know what I mean?
So, Keith,
Got a horror story if anyone wants to hear it later.
Sure.
John, you had a question.
So, Keith, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So I was curious, this kind of touched on what David was asking about. Getting more towards the ingredients of beer. So I know that, my understanding for, say, if you add coffee to a beer, that if you age that beer, the coffee flavor will be muted, like you said, with hops a little bit quicker over time. I'm wondering could you talk more about other ingredients like spices and stuff like that? How do those change over time? Maybe other ingredients like different kinds of sugars and maybe how they change, I don't know.
It's a great question, and I appreciate you asking that. It's interesting because I don't even know where to. I'm trying to keep this like
start at the top. You will not.
I'm not good at that, Bill. You know that.
A gruit.
What's
because
that?
It will create all kinds of off flavors when you allow the spices to change.
Oh, with a gruit?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? Yeah, totally.
Yeah, gruits are really hard to cellar.
Yeah. So if you're adding a lot of herbals, like you're gonna find, I find that they become more prominent. But I always like meter that against the fact that that's just the way I taste the beer. Like I could say, hey, wow, I'm totally getting juniper out of this beer now. And I could hand it to my wife and she says, are you batshit crazy? I don't taste any juniper. So like, what do you call that? Subjective? Like, Yeah, like what you said, Bill. It knocks off a lot of the instant sugars. They get sucked up right away.
Yeah.
The hoppiness gets sucked up right away. Depending on what kind of spices you're adding, like if you're adding clove, you're going to get a lot more of that. I find that banana doesn't tend to go away very easily. It tends to linger as well, which is kind of a byproduct of brewing beer. So I find that one gets stronger over time, but other people would tell me I'm crazy for thinking that. So again, I feel like it's just such a subjective idea, and it also depends on the beer that you're aging. That how do you compare these things? Do you know what I mean?
Totally, yeah.
Really hard to compare. Cam, you had a question.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Bill. So I've been aging beer for about 8 years or so myself, Keith. I've got a couple gems in my thing that my stockpile that I'm looking forward to. What would you say are a couple beers that you've got aging for a while that you are anticipating the opening process?
Let me see here. You know what the problem is? In honor of the inaugural kickoff annex party that we're having here right now, I gave Bill my favorite beers that I was cellaring.
4 of them.
I'll be honest. I was like, oh man, what am I? This is important. I want to give Bill some cool beers.
3 beers. They're on the bottom shelf.
What were they?
Yeah, as a side note, Keith, I just FYI, because you're a Bose guy, I was at a party last year and somebody had been aging, I think accidentally aging a lug tread for, I want to say 3 years, maybe 4 years. He opened it and it was probably the best lug tread I've ever had in my life. Just saying.
You're kidding.
I was shocked. I thought it was going to be horrible. It was actually great.
Wow, it went from good to shitty to good. Right on.
Don't know what happened, but it was, like 3 or 4 years. It was a solid time. So it's kind of fun fact.
You're kidding.
Yeah.
By the way, I like the stay-at-home beard there, huh?
Yeah, it's getting ridiculous, man.
Yeah, David, you're getting a little rough around the edges there. So just so you know, I got Gravity Well, Flying Monkeys Paranormal, and I got Vanishing Point Innocent Gun Imperial Stout that was already aged 200 days before they bottled it.
And that was aged 200 days before they bottled it. I've aged it for 2.5 years, and now it's in your hands.
You don't have another bottle of that?
Nope.
Oh, well, then that one will stay until you and I can share it together.
You are my one and only, Bill.
I know. Yeah. Jackie kicks me out of the house. You know where I'm showing up.
And vice versa. But sorry, Cam, I didn't have an answer for that because all of my beers are waiting for Bill and I to drink together.
How about a style then? If you don't have anything so forth, are you like more of are you a stout ager? Are you a Belgian?
Oh yeah, totally a stout ager. I find that like we were talking about, like a lot of those the heavy hitting coffee and the heavy hitting chocolate flavors kind of tend to mellow out and blend with the rest of the beer better the longer you age them. So I think that stouts, and it tends to be Russian Imperial because they have a high ABV, so they're going to be more stable to age longer. That they tend to be my favorites to age, but that doesn't mean I don't age anything. And the fact that you said that a lug was aged for 3 years, did you say?
Some ungodly number of years that I would not recommend to anybody. Yes.
Even go near it, yeah. And and that's the thing. I mean, obviously with being with Bose, like I can taste a lug tread and it's like, I know if it's green or I know if it's, 2 months old or 6 months old or whatever, but that's not a good thing. But the fact that you're like, hey, it's 3 years old, and that was the best one I had.
So there is hope for the Coors Light. Is that what you're saying?
I think so.
Just a bit of a question. Are Are there any brewers you think that are doing things consistently enough that you could do like not just call it longitudinal aging, but compare like let's say I bought 6 Orval, and then at the end of having one every 3 months, I bought 6 more Orval to try an old versus a new. Like I would assume the Trappist beers are pretty consistent in what they're doing.
That's the thing.
New side by side.
Like at that level, they're actually trying to maintain consistency throughout brews, and well, they're attaining it. Like when it comes to a beer like that, so like you do have a lot of craft breweries that, you know, flavor profiles will change from brew to brew, even within a certain kind of like style, like, you know, like their flagship style, that this batch tastes different than this batch, but they're kind of the same.
Mm-hmm.
But on that level for that long, you're probably going to have within 6 months to a year, you're going to have the same flavor profile. So it might not be worth trying to compare those, because any of the ingredients that they're using were probably harvested within the same year. And so like that gets down to that level of like how the soil was, because this is a big thing. Like, how is the soil for the hops that we're growing? How's the soil for the malt, and like all that kind of stuff? That can change the flavor profile, and a lot of breweries want to eliminate that. This is what our beer wants to be. We want it to taste like this, and we don't want this or this. We want this. So on that level, they can afford to say, we're buying this and not this or this. So year over year, that can change, but in 1 year, they don't want that to vary much.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's one that you would pick to say, like, you know what, if you're going to try aged versus not aged, whether it's a style or a particular label or something like that, where it's like, you know what, they're going to be rock solid in their consistency year over year, even given the variety of weather and things like that.
What I would say for that one is we're in the perfect area for that, because the water table, while it is relatively consistent, can fluctuate ever so slightly, and the macro breweries don't necessarily compensate for that. When you have a lot of breweries these days, what they're doing is they're taking the pH balance and the mineral content of each influx of water, and they're going to level it out to make it taste like the beer they want it to taste like. When you have like macrobreweries that are, or microbreweries, sorry, are brewing, they're not compensating for that. They're letting the water be what it is, and they're going to make their beer. So I would probably, if you have an absolute favorite, like sorry, they're escaping me, but from Seaforth, I want to say 30 Days on Earth.
Half Hours on Earth.
Say it again?
Half Hours on Earth.
Thank you. Like, take some of their beers, cellar them, because they're on such a small level. It's an amazing beer to start with. Why wouldn't you buy like an extra few bottles, age them, and see what they taste like down the road? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like something like that on a micro level, where they're not trying to mess with nature.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Because I'm looking, I just live around the corner from Counterpoint, and I love everything they do. But one of the things that I particularly like is their duet is different every, like it's still a duet. It's still what they're doing for their double IPA or whatever. But every batch gets a new number because it's a new batch, because it's not going to be identical. And I'd be curious both in how it ages, but also in how they stand up, the fresh version versus the aged version.
Totally. And I'm sure that they feel the same way, right?
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of like nano and micro brewing. That's the beauty of it, is that like, hey, this is the closest representation to what I want it to be. So enjoy it for what it is. And it's not going to taste exactly the same, but enjoy it for what it is. And if the beer starts to taste too consistent, then they've reached a level where you're like, oh, you kind of got it. You got Mother Nature beat now. You can make her do what you want.
You're saying that they're going to start making Coors Light.
I didn't say that. You said that.
Yeah.
Ting.
Budweiser tastes exactly the same anywhere in North America.
Yep. And I give credit to that. If to be the McDonald's of beer, knock yourself out. The food's going to taste the same no matter where I go, what I do. Knock yourself out. But sometimes we don't appreciate the fact that,
Yeah.
You could go to the same guy who sells corn every year. You go to that same little wagon he sells it at, and some years it tastes super sweet, and some days it's not, or some years it's not as sweet, but it still tastes good, and you still go every year. So why wouldn't you do that for your beer? Because it's the exact same thing that's happening.
Zoom gave me a few more minutes, okay? This was my first Zoom meeting. They said I could have a few more minutes than 40. Anybody else have any questions?
I've got one about hops. I know when you get into wine, my wife and I did our honeymoon in Italy, and we did a whole bunch of wine drinking, as one does, and we learned that I think 2010 was considered the vintage of the century for the Tuscany region of wines. And 2015 was also a very good vintage. Do you guys in the brewing world get into talking about hops that way? Like, this is a really good year of citra hops relative to last year? Or on the hop side, is it more consistent? Or
If there is that case, I've never heard of it. It's more just like, are they available? And depending on if you need it or not, are they organic status? But typically, I don't hear anything about hops being construed in the same way as, I guess that would be grapes, that this was a great year for hops and these ones are perfect. It's kind of, if they're there, they're there, and if they're not, they're not. And you find a lot of breweries fight each other for them. So, because I mean, with the onslaught of breweries that you've had over the past few years, and I wish well on everybody, but we'll see what comes out of what we've been enduring. There's been a huge battle for hops these days.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't even know if people have been as concerned as the quality. What's that, Bill?
In 2012, there was an actual failure in the German hops, and there was a worldwide shortage.
Really?
Yeah. That was the year that a whole pile of microbreweries changed their core beers because they had to try different hops.
I didn't know that's why. Awesome.
You know what? The guys at Grand River, they use that one particular hop for like the base for everything that they made, and they had to change everything.
they just get bought out by all the multinationals, right? Who just buy massive amounts.
So I can sell my hops to 7 or 8 people, or I can sell my hops to one person.
Well, but even you and I, Bill, we've talked about this with like soy and stuff where you buy futures. And now there's futures on hops, right? Like, who would have expected there's futures on hops? Like, well, okay, I'm going to buy you hops 5 years from now. We're like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Who would have thought that?
That was news to me, but yeah. At least we're not trading oil futures right now, okay? David.
Well, now's a good time to get into hops because everybody's drinking.
Mr. Hussey.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just saying whoopsie to the oil comment. I was laughing at that. I didn't realize I was unmuted. Actually, though, question, because you just happened to mention that one in Seaforth. So I've been working on a little mini project for myself, which is I've been creating a map of all the breweries in Ontario, which you can find, but I created my own trackable one where during this crisis, even if it's like I can't go out to many places, some places still have their beer stores or the retail stores open or whatever. And I've created like little regions where I find there's small clusters, even in some of the areas in Southern Ontario, you wouldn't expect them. But is there any like maybe around here that you're like, these are hidden gems that a lot of people don't know about, Keith?
See, I'm over in Rockwood, right?
Oh, okay.
So for you guys, there probably are. But for me, there's a guy, and you probably already have him. I'm going to assume you do. And if you don't, awesome. There's a guy that does Badlands Brewing over in Cheltenham. Do you have him on your list?
Yeah, so I actually took the list from I think it's Bevon or whatever that website is. I just sniped their entire database and then I made my own trackable list. Whatever. Like they were like, yeah, we have our own list. I'm like, oh, can I like say which ones I've been to and like track it all myself? And so I grabbed the entire database, and then Google Maps has this awesome like just upload your entire map if you want to. So I just did that. Badlands though, eh?
Badlands, that guy like makes some pretty awesome beers, and the cidery over here, Heartwood Cidery. I don't know if they're over here in Ospringe. Sorry, that's like it's just at the top. It's at the corner of like Highway 25 and Highway 24, if that helps.
Oh, okay.
So it's halfway between Guelph and Orangeville, and it's literally like you drive up and it's a farmhouse and a barn, and they're doing their ciders, and it's absolutely gorgeous, and great ciders, and they sell.
Eve goes
like,
badass.
What?
Eve goes badass.
Totally.
That cider is phenomenal.
Totally. See, you know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Wait, have you? That's another question after. But yeah, sorry.
Tim, we don't want you answering this one publicly on a recording.
If you've been to that cidery, you've been past our house. Let's put it that way. And you know that, Bill.
Don't drag me into this.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I haven't been there, but we had their cider. It was at, there is a brewery in Elmira. It just opened up not that long ago, but they did a collaboration.
Yes.
Shoot. What's the name of it?
I know, I'm feeling the same way because I just met them not long before. Yeah.
And then for another one, Willibald in Ayr, Ontario. They just opened up not that long ago. I got some Rural Roots is the one in Elmira.
That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome. But Willibald is in Ayr, Ontario. They just opened up not that long ago. They're actually doing hand sanitizer as well. But I picked up some of their IPAs. They can do, they'll do delivery too.
That's really cool.
That's
in
sweet.
Ayr.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yep. But yeah, that Eve goes badass with the ghost peppers in there. It was
totally.
I would totally recommend that cider for anybody to just try it once, and you'll be hooked.
And they do still have it available at their location. If you look it up, you can pop by there and check it out, and you can buy some of their maple syrup and whatnot. So,
I'll have to do that.
But yeah, sorry, yeah, like there are a ton of like hyper local things that it would almost be awesome if you put up what you've got. I don't know if you've done that already because I'm not tech
I've actually been thinking about making this public and then having people be able to do corrections. Bill, you surprised me with a suggestion for the website. I have now surprised you with my suggestion for the website, because I'd love to turn this almost into like an app format for something exactly like this, because being able to track all the Ontario breweries you've been to would be sweet. Like, so
it's amazing. Like,
yeah, just being able to open your phone and be like, I just went to this one. It's now on like my list. Like me and my lady friend were like, yeah, this would be awesome if we could do everyone in Ontario. And I have a feeling a lot of other people would want to do that too.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And like, I would appreciate something like that. Right. And as we were talking about it, I just remember there's a place, I don't know if you guys have already know about it, but there's in Harrow, which is outside of Windsor.
Yeah.
There's a brewery called GL Heritage Brewing, and they make some absolutely fantastical beers. that are
Just be careful.
so
down
good.
in the night country,
Yeah.
you could get in serious trouble.
There's a
What's
lot of
that?
people from Harrow, for some reason. They're all over Waterloo. I know so many people are connected to this little village. It's really a cool spot.
Anyways, Keith, thank you for sharing your insights and knowledge with all of us. And remind all of you that Cam and I will be having a live stream conversation next Tuesday. Him and I are going to have a conversation. I'm going to get you on WhatsApp, Cam, after I get through this. Him and I are going to have a conversation about what we're going to talk about, and then I'll get that posted online. So everybody, first of all, thank you, Keith, for sharing me your great beer.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank you,
I
all
hope
of
I've
you,
helped
for joining me.
I hope helped more than hindered. Let's put it that way.
Info@kickoffannex.ca is how you can get a hold of me. Any suggestions for who you would like to see interviewed or have a conversation with online, please forward that to me. Any other suggestions I'm open to. Again, info@kickoffannex.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks so much, Bill, for doing this.
Thank you.